And good afternoon, Pittsburgh Steelers fans. Welcome to another episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. I am your host, as always, Tony Defeo. And thank you for joining me on another fine Saturday afternoon. It is Saturday, right? Yeah. It's hard to tell with the Steelers and their schedule as of late. They just played on Wednesday. They won an ugly game against the Ravens, and they play again on Monday afternoon at 5 against the Washington football team. So it's been a weird stretch for the Steelers the last couple of weeks with the COVID-19 wreaking havoc on their schedule, but they're still 11-0. They won again on Wednesday. It might have been ugly, but it was another win. So they're 11-0. And before I get started into the meat of my show, I just wanted to encourage you, as always, to check out the Behind Steel Curtain YouTube channel, where we bring you shows like this. There's Steelers Hangover, Know Your Enemy, the Steelers Preview, Steelers post-game show, and you can also find those shows on the audio platform, and you can find every every Behind Steel Curtain podcast on any audio, any place where you can listen to an audio podcast. And in addition to the YouTube shows that are also on audio, you can also find Touchdown Under, hosted by a couple of guys from Australia. There's the Let's Ride with Jeff Hartman, the Stats Geek with Dave Schofield, the Live Mic with Michael Benedict, the Retro Show with yours truly and Brian Anthony Davis. So please check that all out, and check out Behind the Steel Curtain, the website, where we bring you news, commentary, film breakdown. As we like to say, it's your one-stop shop for all your Steelers needs. And as always, I want to welcome everybody into the live chat. There's Dave Shipley, my man Terry, T Money, Odessa Hall, Steelers Pittsburgh, Solarverse, Jared Devil, see them, Ryan O'Toole, Ezra, awesome crew. So thank you for joining me on this, again, not really a fine Saturday afternoon. It's kind of gloomy, but it is December 5th. And to repeat, the Steelers are 11-0, and I wanted to begin with Wednesday's win over the Ravens. And as my friend Terry likes to say, I'll pull that comment up. And ugly wins are still wins, and I'll touch more on that in a bit. And it was an ugly win. You know, the Ravens were of course compromised severely due to COVID-19. They had several players on the COVID list, including the reigning MVP Lamar Jackson, their quarterback, the guy that makes the whole thing work. And he was replaced by RG3 Robert Griffin III. And of course, the Ravens were missing several other players, including their top two running backs, J.K. Dobbins and Mark Ingram. They're missing people along the defensive line, so people were dismayed that it was a close game. But I think that all came down to execution. Execution, and we have to remember that Marquise Pouncey was put on the COVID list at the 11th hour. It seemed like that on Wednesday he was on a contact tracing. James Conner was tested positive for the virus last week. Who else? Stephon Tuitt was a quarantine casualty. So, the Steelers weren't exactly at full strength either, but it was still an ugly win, or it was an ugly game, and it's hard to make excuses for Pittsburgh, even though I'm going to try right now. Of course, the Ravens, the strength of their team, other than sorry, I had some technical difficulties. I'm sorry. I hope you're all still with me. But anyway, it says I'm still live on the screen, so I guess I'm good. But I think it came down to execution. The Steelers, how many passes did they drop on Wednesday? 10. At least 10. I've seen anywhere from 6 to 10, but let's just say we'll meet in the middle and say 5. Whatever. There were a lot of drops, a lot of key drops, and as I said previously, when people were worried about the running game and getting that going, the key to the Steelers' success in 2020 was going to come down to Ben Roethlisberger and that passing game, and how many more points could they have scored on Wednesday had they not dropped so many key passes, especially in the red zone? If they scored another 10, 14 points, we're not talking about how ugly that game was, So and obviously it came down to a couple of other things too. If Ray McLeod doesn't fumble the punt early on after the Steelers had taken a 6-0 lead, then maybe that game's in the bag. Even with the late touchdown to Marquise Brown. So it just came down to execution. If the Steelers are going to get anywhere in 2020, obviously they're already in a great place. But if they're going to keep moving forward and get to the place where everybody wants them to be, and that's the Super Bowl, and ultimately winning that game, they're going to have to execute the short passing game, the intermediate passing game, and they didn't do that last week, at least not fully. They didn't execute, at least not 100%. And Ben Roethlisberger, as Brian Anthony Davis pointed out on the Hangover on Thursday, he probably could have had another 36 for 51, whatever it was. He could have had a much better game and many more passing yards had the receivers held on to these balls. Deontay Johnson had several drops. Eric Ebron had 2 that I remember. I think James Washington had 1, even though he made a great play later in the game. He had 1. Maybe Juju had. I can't even remember anymore. There were so many. So, and I think focus might have been an issue too. And when you, as based on last week's show, I was all for the NFL moving the game from Thursday to Sunday and then from Sunday to Tuesday, because my position was and always will be, you do whatever you can to keep these guys safe, to keep the coronavirus from spreading among players and then into society, and to get the game in without having a forfeit, right? But having said that, I just did not get the last minute move from Tuesday night to Wednesday afternoon. I mean, if you can't play if you couldn't play Tuesday night, then what difference? How could you? What's another, what would have been 15, 17, whatever. Let's see, 15, 12 hours, 8 to 8 is 12, 15. What's another 18 hours? That's what it amounted to. And I think a lot of it had to do with the Ravens getting a chance to practice, but at least one day. But what's one day of practice? How many teams, what was it? The Titans, they barely got to practice after their bye. And then the following game against the Bills, they barely got to practice and they played. So I thought that was an unfair last second. I was okay up to Tuesday, but to postpone it one more day, I thought that was a little unfair to the Steelers. And I could see where focus could have been an issue in that game, because how these athletes are, these coaches are. They're creatures of habit, right? And if you take them out of their routine a little bit, it hurts. If you take them out that much, where they had to play the game almost a week after it was originally scheduled, I think that factored in. And you have to give the Ravens credit too. John Harbaugh's a great coach. He might be a bit of a jerk and he might be annoying, but he's a great head coach. And the strength of their team, other than Lamar Jackson, is their secondary. I mean, they have fine defensive backs, and it was strength on strength. And the Ravens made some plays and the Steelers didn't execute, and that's what the game ultimately came down to. So, but I was mostly happy with the win. I wrote an article that was published on Thursday saying how it was great that they were 11-0, but I still thought it sucked. And I thought a lot of people took that the wrong way, because I read the comments and there were people saying, "Oh, stop whining. I'm sick of all this negativity." But that brings me to my next point. And the reason why I thought that win sucked had nothing to do with the performance. It had nothing to do with style points. I could care less if they win every game 3-2. I mean, it would get kind of boring after a while, but that wasn't my main point of that article. My main point was Bud Dupree and the fact that he suffered a torn ACL, a season-ending ACL tear. with what, 5 minutes left to go in the game, whatever it was. I mean, it's just it's tough because they're already down Devin Bush. They lost him in October, and now they're losing, in my opinion, one of their top 3 or 4 defensive players, one of their most indispensable defensive players. They lost him for the year, so that's why I thought it sucked. And nothing about the fact that they won ugly. I could care less about that because you're going to have those kind of games every now and then in the NFL. That's what happened in Dallas a few weeks earlier. They won ugly. Who cares? I don't care. It's a tough league, whether the other team's compromised due to COVID-19 or not. It's still a tough league, and these are all professionals. So that wasn't my issue. My issue was the loss of Bud Dupree. And, yes, I have faith in Alex Highsmith, and I'm excited to see him play. And I'm excited about his potential. I think he has great potential. But Bud Dupree was already realizing his potential. He spent the last 2 years, the better part of the last 2 years, unfortunately, now with the injury, realizing his potential, the potential that everybody was waiting for. I mean, I don't think he had as bad of a first 3 years as everybody else did. I thought he was okay. He, had some injury problems and maybe some coaching problems with Joey Porter as his position coach. And then once, he left and Keith Butler took over those duties. I think it's not necessarily a coincidence that his play started to improve, but it was ultimately it was him that did the work, put in the work, and continued to get better. And he was at the height of his powers in 2019 and 2020. He was playing exceptional. I mean, there were people earlier in the year that were saying that maybe he was a candidate, an underdog, a dark horse candidate for defensive player of the year. I mean, that's how well he was playing through the first 11 games. So that was my main point about that. And it's just, it brings me to my next point. And that's, people talk about Mike Tomlin and the team's underachieving over the past decade or so. And the fact that they've only won 3 playoff games since they were in Super Bowl 45. But what they don't talk about nearly as much is how many key injuries this team has suffered during the Tomlin era. It's not Tomlin's fault. It's just a matter of luck, I guess. Right before the playoffs. Obviously, Bud Dupree's the latest example. The last time they were in the playoffs in 2017, Ryan Shazier went down with the unfortunate, horrific spinal injury that ultimately cost him his career. I mean, I wish him all the best. I hope he continues to improve physically and have a great life with his wife, and I think he has a kid now. But the point is, he was there. He did all the heavy lifting for their defense back then. Their defense wasn't what it is now, and that's why it is comforting that their defense is so good now that they maybe can absorb the loss of Dupree along with Bush. But back then, Shazier was everything for that defense. Yeah, Joe Hayden was there by then, but they counted on Shazier to do so much. And you saw how disastrous it was in the playoffs when they had to go up against a Jacksonville team, and how much they missed him in that game. The year before that, Le'Veon Bell, he didn't get hurt on the eve of the playoffs. He got hurt right trying to get to the AFC Championship game. He had those back-to-back awesome performances. He set a franchise march for rushing yards in a playoff game. He set it in the wild card game against the Dolphins and broke it the following week against the Chiefs. But at some point, I think it was in the Miami game, he hurt his groin, and it got worse and worse. And by the time the AFC Championship game arrived, he was ineffective, and he barely played that game. I don't think it would have mattered in that game. I think that was more the defense and the Steelers zone blitz defense that they were playing in that game, and they had no answer for Tom Brady and that lacrosse player whose name I forget. But the year before that, they lost Bell midway through the year with an MCL tear. Okay, big deal. They had, as it turned out anyway, it wasn't that big of a deal because they had D'Angelo Williams, who was a fine veteran, a team player, a guy that they signed in the offseason because of the LeGarrette Blount snafu. And the offense was doing really well with Williams as the running back. I mean, I think they had 5 games in a row where they scored 30 points or more. So the offense was humming along fairly well, but they lost in week 16 to Ryan Mallett and the Ravens. If you want to see how Wednesday could have been worse, they could have lost that game. And that's what happened to the Steelers in 2015. They lost to Ryan Mallett, who the Ravens signed off the street that week. So they lost that game, and they had to win, and they needed help in week 17. So they had to play everybody. And Williams was one of those people that they had to play. And he suffered, it was either a foot or an ankle injury. I forget what it was, but either way, he was done for the playoffs, as it turned out. So they lost him. So they were down to Jordan Todman and Fitz Toussaint. That's who they had as running backs in the playoffs. And then during the playoffs, they lost Antonio Brown. The ironic part is they probably don't beat the Bengals if Vontaze Burfict doesn't lay out Brown with that really dirty hit in the waning seconds of that wild card game. But they lost Brown for the divisional round against the Broncos. If they have Brown, maybe they win that game. It was a close game. So that's that year. The year before that, 2014, Le'Veon Bell was their entire offense basically down the stretch, and they had to play him in week 17 because they had to try to win a division against the Bengals. He goes down with a hyperextended knee in the fourth quarter, and he's out for that playoff game against the Ravens, the wild card game. They signed Ben Tate off the street. They have Josh Brown, some jabroni who would go on to accuse Ben Roethlisberger of fumbling years later. So that's who they had for that playoff game. So, I mean, you can keep going with this. 2011, they went into that game against the Broncos, that wild card game, totally depleted on the injury front. 2007, Tomlin's first year. Willie Parker leading the league in rushing through week 16. He breaks his leg in week 16. He's out. And plus they had a few other people out for the wild card game against the Jaguars. So you can go on and on with this. The 2 years that they were – Aaron Smith was lost in 2007. I think he was lost in 2011 too. But the only 2 years where the Steelers were relatively healthy or mostly healthy going into the playoffs under Tomlin, 2008 and 2010, they made the Super Bowl both years. What a coincidence. So that's kind of my point. That's why I was so down and disgusted about that Ravens game. It wasn't that it was close and ugly. It's a bitter division rivalry. I wasn't that shocked by that, the fact that it was a close game. I was just disappointed with Dupree being lost for the year because I think they have a chance to do something really special this year. Obviously, they're 11-0. People are going on and on about how they're overrated. The national pundits are calling them overrated and ranking them, wherever they rank them in the power rankings. And Colin Cowherd went off on them the other day saying they're not a true Super Bowl contender, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't really matter what anybody thinks. If they keep winning, they're gonna be the Super Bowl champs, or at least gonna go on a run. But if they keep losing key players, then they're gonna prove all these people right, if not totally right, simply right because of the injuries that they're suffering. So, there are a lot of people that might say, "I told you so" at the end of the year, and simply because they might be missing one too many key players. That's why I was upset about that game. It was strictly I was just, down about the injury to Dupree because I think he's really a special player and somebody that TJ Watt relies on. You heard Tomlin many weeks back in one of his press conferences. They asked him about Watt's his pregame rituals and his practice rituals and who he talks to, and Tomlin basically said the only person he talks to is Bud Dupree. He's a pretty intense guy on game day and during practice. He doesn't interact with anybody but Bud Dupree. They're buds. They're best buds. He was on his Bud Brings a Buddy show recently, meaning TJ Watt. So they have a great chemistry together. They work well together. I don't think it could be overlooked how big of a deal that is. So, well, with that rant, that brings to a close the first half, or part one, I should say, of this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. If you're listening on one of our audio platforms, please download part two. I have a couple more things to talk about, and I will answer some questions. And if you're watching on YouTube, don't go anywhere. I'll be back in like 2 and 2. And welcome back to this episode of Steelers Brunch with Tony. This is part 2. And thank you for joining me, for staying with me in the live chat. Let's see if I have any new live chat folks in there. There's Boing Boom, Nathaniel Karate, Ryan Stanley, Steelers Territory, Louisiana Purchase. And before I go on, I wanted to see if I missed any questions. Actually, now that I think of it, what I plan on doing at some point is having a show with all questions, because I always feel like I missed some really key questions throughout the show, and I always feel bad about that. So I plan on doing that. Hopefully, maybe the Steelers will have a game where everything's wrapped up, like week 16, week 17, and I can do one of those things. Or maybe there'll be another COVID outbreak, and there's an 11-day gap where there aren't any Steeler games, and I can maybe do that then. That's not the ideal situation, but I plan on doing that between now and the playoffs. So a little teaser for you. But anyway, that brings me to my next topic, and it involves Bud Dupree, and it involves the franchise tag that that the Steelers placed on him after the 2019 season. They tried to work out a deal. They couldn't. After they placed a tag on him, it was for $16 million. He filed a grievance with the union to be paid as a defensive end, because that would have paid him another $2 million. Unfortunately, or for him anyway, I don't think he won that grievance. But excuse me for one second. I appear to have a super chat question. I can't miss that, because those are always very welcome. So let's see if I have it here. Here we are. Dave Shipley, $5. Just saying hi, T. Well, hi to you too, Dave Shipley, and thank you for the donation. It's always appreciated. But that brings you back to Bud and the franchise tag, and that's one of the with everything that's happened since he went down on Wednesday. The thing that's really hasn't been discussed much is how much that is unfortunate for him and his future and his earning potential. Because the only things I've heard about that is, it's too bad that we lost Bud for the playoffs, and or maybe they can get him next. They can re-sign him next year on the cheap, But what nobody's talked about is how this is why a lot of these players don't like the franchise tag. And yes, it's part of the CBA, and they agreed to the CBA. And I don't know what concessions the owners gave them in order to agree to this thing. But this is why I don't get too excited about free agency every year, because essentially the guys that become available, the players that become available, are not the cream, the top guys. They're not the cream of the crop, right? They're the guys that the owners said, we like you, but we don't think enough of you to franchise tag you. And usually the top players, the top free agents, aren't available because of the franchise tag, and they can't go out and maximize their second contract. They can't go out and maximize their earning power right at the height of their physical powers. And this is why they don't like it. And this is why Le'Veon Bell did what he did a couple of times, and he made a lot of enemies. I mean, and there were other things that contributed to that, but people really turned on him after he held out in 2017 in training camp, and then he held out in 2018 in training camp and the entire season, and people took that personally, and they said, well, he should have signed the contract that the Steelers offered him. And what really should have happened in a perfect world is he should have been allowed to go out and shop his services to the highest bidder. If it happened to be the Steelers, fine. If not, but now that, we see the other end of that with what happened with Bud Dupree, we kind of get a sense of why these guys sometimes do this, because we take it personally when they hold out, but we don't seem to care. And the teams, it's just business. When, teams don't seem to care all that much whenever these guys suffer the kind of injury that Dupree did. It's like, all right, well, if you can't get back physically, then that's just how it goes. Too bad. And so that's why they have to take it personally. That's why they have to make business decisions sometimes, like holding out a training camp, like holding out the season, because now we see what can happen. I mean, this guy was, if he made it through the year, and who knows what happens in the playoffs, Super Bowl, but if he made it through the entire year, and say the Steelers don't franchise tag him again, then who knows? He could have. The sky was the limit for him as far as his earning potential in 2021. Now, who knows what his future is going to be? Who knows? I mean, yeah, medical advancements have been great, and we've made great strides in that regard over the years. But who knows? As we saw with Jarvis Jones, a half a second in terms of speed sometimes can be the difference between getting 10, 12 sacks a year or being a bust. And Jarvis Jones was basically a bust because he was a half a second slower than he should have been, or that he needed to be an elite pass rusher at the pro level. They said it. A lot of experts said it, and I didn't believe it at the time, but it turned out to be true because he could never get to the quarterback. Bud Dupree was a much better athlete, or he is a much better athlete. I don't want to, talking past tense about the guy. I mean, he could still come back and have a great career. But anyway, this is why they do that. And it might be easy for us to say, he still made $16 million last year. He made $9 million the year before. You take me and my current life situation, my status, and you say, here's $16 million, Tony, at the end of the year. But at the end of the year, we're gonna tear your ACL. I'm like, all right, I'll sign up for that. You can tear both ACLs for $16 million. But these guys don't think that way. They're in a different world. They're in a different bubble than we are. A guy like Bud Dupree, he's been working for this moment for, a decade. He's been working for that moment to cash in. And most people, whether it's professional athletes or us peaceful civilians, we usually only get one true chance in life to cash in big time. And he might still get that chance, but and this is I mentioned TJ Watt earlier. Well, I mean, everybody loves TJ Watt, like Mike Tomlin said, you can never have too many Watts on your team, right? And they have two right now, and everybody, it's a marriage made in heaven, it seems. But what if TJ Watt gets through 2021, which would be his at the end of his rookie deal, and he and the Steelers can't reach an agreement? And believe me, TJ Watt's going to get paid. The question is, how much is he going to get, or how much are the Steelers going to be able to pay him? Are they going to be able to afford him? Because he's going to sign the richest contract in Steelers history, other than excluding Ben Roethlisberger. He's going to get that kind of contract. There's no doubt in my mind. But if they can't reach the kind of deal that he wants, and they franchise tag him, what if he says, well, my buddy Bud, look what happened to him. I think I'm going to hold out, if not the entire season, at least OTAs and training camp and blah, blah, blah. And then before you know it, he's everybody's enemy. Everybody hates TJ Watt. So, but could you, based on what happened to Bud Dupree, can you really blame him if he decides to do that? Because, again, these guys most of these players only have one chance to truly cash in, and that's their second contract. So that's just, I don't know if we'll ever get to a place. I think as a fan, I think it's great that these superstars have to stick around for a year or two longer than maybe they would under a true free agency system. But for them, it has to suck. And I wonder if there's ever going to be a time when the franchise tag goes away. And I'm sure a lot of athletes or NFL athletes hope that it does. And before I continue, I have another super chat that I got to get to because it's always welcome. Ryan Stanley, $5. Thank you for that donation. Am I the only one hoping Kansas City loses another game so we can afford to lose a game and this stress from being undefeated? Undefeated is unneeded. That's the weird thing about it, Ryan, about this year is, yeah, they're 11-0, but they've faced so much scrutiny as far as their legitimacy as a true Super Bowl contender that it really hasn't been discussed as much as it should be. The focus is on them being frauds, them being fraudulent, and and not so much on whether or not they can catch the Miami Dolphins and make NFL history by being the first team we're the second team to go undefeated through the Super Bowl, but the first team to go 19-0, or maybe 20-0, as Brian said the other day, if they had an extra playoff round, or an extra playoff team, I should say. I think a lot of people want Kansas City to lose for a lot of reasons, because it would help the Steelers. It would give them breathing room. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people want the Chiefs to lose, and because I think that bye now more than ever, when you see how tough, how much injuries affect teams and how much they can potentially hurt a team. This is why those byes are so valuable, and getting that extra week off in the playoffs is so valuable. But I have a couple more things I wanted to talk. Thank you, Ryan, for the $5. And one more thing I wanted to. Well, I guess a couple more things, and that's Alex Highsmith, the young Mr. Alex Highsmith, who now has a great opportunity in front of him. I mean, I think a lot of people kind of knew that he would be he was being groomed to be the starter next year, because I don't think up until the injury anyway, anybody expected the Steelers and Bud Dupree to reach an agreement on a long-term deal. It just didn't seem realistic. So Alex Highsmith was the presumed starter heading into 2021. Well, now that comes a lot earlier than anyone thought it would, and it's a great opportunity for him. Here's a guy who was a walk-on at Charlotte. He worked his way up to become a high draft pick. I mean, he turned himself into a great pass rusher in college, and he became a third-round pick. And now he has a chance to really. Who would have thought a year ago at this time he was in college, dreaming about life in the pros. And here he is a year later on an 11-0 team, and now they're depending on him big time to help them get through the rest of the season and hopefully win a championship. So, and now he's playing opposite, or he's going to be playing opposite of the in my opinion, the favorite for Defensive Player of the Year in 2020, and it's TJ Watt. So he has a great opportunity, and I think that's a lot of people are talking about them going out and signing a veteran, or what are they going to do. Jeff Hartman wrote an article the other day talking about how it's going to take, many people to fill the void of Dupree. And I kind of agree, but I think they're going to kind of do what they did with Robert Spillane, that inside linebacker. They're going to give Alex Highsmith the first crack at it. And if he plays well, if he shows out, so to speak, if he shows an aptitude for rushing the passer at the pro level, then I think they're going to leave well enough alone and keep him in there. But obviously you have Ola, you have Elliott, and they might go out and sign a veteran. I don't know if it's going to be any of the names that people were talking about. I know a lot of people. James Harrison made the news the other day because he was having he was being examined by James Bradley, the team's physician, or the team surgeon. I don't know. I guess the team doctor. Clay Matthews has been mentioned. But I don't know if they're going to go that route, and even if they did, I don't think they're going to come in right away and start. Like Anthony Davis mentioned the other day, it takes a while for first of all, they're going to have to come in and go on a COVID list for a week or 10 days, whatever it is, and then after that, I mean, you're talking about trying to acclimate yourself to the Steelers defense, and a guy like Harrison. It wouldn't be that difficult for him since he spent so many years in the Steelers system, but he's 42 years old. I don't care how much you lift. I mean, it's 42 is old for an outside linebacker. And Clay Matthews, he's broken down. There's a reason why these guys have gone unsigned all year, because a lot of teams think they're washed up, and they probably are. So even if they did sign one of those guys, I don't know if they would even play a whole heck of a lot. And when it comes to James Harrison, we've seen that story play out before. When he came in, he re-signed in 2017, which just so happened to be the same year that TJ Watt was drafted and Bud Dupree started to play better. So I don't know if you want to go down that road again. People say they hate distractions. that might be a distraction that might affect their team chemistry. So I don't know if they want to go that route. So I think it's going to be up to Alex Highsmith to take advantage of this opportunity. I've mentioned before, guys like Vince Williams, they were thrown in their rookie year, and he did okay for himself, and he eventually turned himself into a reliable starter. Spillane's doing okay for himself. So, there's I think Alex Highsmith has a higher pedigree than both of those players I just mentioned. So who knows? With TJ Watt drawing so much attention, teams are going to try to double teaming him now. They almost have to. They'd be crazy not to. But they might double team him, but then, that frees up Stephon Tuitt, it frees up Cam Hayward. So, Alex Highsmith is going to have a lot of opportunities to win some one-on-one battles. So, I'm excited for that guy and for his father, who I follow on Twitter, who's become a bit of a mini celebrity in his own right. So let's see what he can do. That's the bright side in all this. That's a silver lining. As a young guy gets a chance to help an undefeated football team go on a Super Bowl run. So good luck to Alex Highsmith. And of course, that's one more thing I want to talk about before I open things up to questions very briefly. And then I'll take some questions. And that's the Washington football team. That's who the Steelers play on Monday at 5. They have an excellent defense. I think they're 4th in total yards, 7th in points, or maybe those rankings are reversed. Either way, they have a really good defense and an excellent pass rush. I was looking at their stats, and they have 3 or 4 guys that have 5 or 6 sacks. So they're going to be a handful. That whole thing with Ben Roethlisberger getting rid of the ball quicker than anybody in the NFL right now is going to come in handy, because I think, if he doesn't do that, he's going to be really sore on Tuesday morning. He might be sore on Tuesday morning anyway after this game. They have, I think, 36 sacks. So that's going to be a challenge. I expect it to be, honestly, the game to play out a lot like it did on Wednesday against the Ravens. I look for a low scoring game. But I think the Steelers are going to, pull it out in the end. I think they're going to make enough plays on defense. I think they're going to get to Alex Smith, who's been, I think, I was looking at the stats, and either the Washington has 36 sacks and they've given up 35, or those numbers are reversed. Either way, they have a lot of sacks and they've given up a lot of sacks. So Alex Smith, who he's pretty mobile. I mean, despite his very noteworthy leg injury that almost ended his life, according to some reports. Despite that, he's still very mobile, but I think he can be had as far as getting after him. He's certainly not Lamar Jackson or RG3 or even Trace McSorley as far as mobility. So I think they could take advantage of that even without Bud Dupree. So I think it's going to be a low scoring game, but I think Pittsburgh will prevail, and they're certainly going to be motivated. They're not going to be overlooking this team, despite Washington being 4-7, because I think Mike Tomlin was pretty angry with that team with their performance on Wednesday. And according to some reports I read, he really chewed into them in the locker room afterwards. So they're certainly going to be motivated to put on a good performance after that stinker on Wednesday. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And on that note, I will take some comments and questions from the live chat. So let's see what we have here. Here's another one from T-Money, a comment and a question. Careers end all the time. Can anyone recall a similar situation where a retired player made a significant impact? I guess you could say Brett Favre did, but his retirement was brief, right? And James Harrison's been trying to retire since 2014. So, he's coming in and out of retirement many times. I think he's pretty much done now. So I don't think he would be able to make much of a difference. He's a great, obviously he's very dedicated in the gym. At 42 is 42. And it's a little different for an outside linebacker than maybe a quarterback, or certainly a kicker or a punter. So let's see what I have here. Dave Shipley brings up a good point. Remember our old friend John Bostic, who was tasked to cover Keenan Allen. I think it was Keenan Allen in that Chargers game a couple years ago. He says Ebron will exploit Bostic's coverage ability or lack thereof. And that's a great point, Dave. I think, that's something I didn't even think of, but you're right. I forgot Bostic was on that team, but I think he's the one who was responsible for the injury to Joe Burrow. So yeah, that's John Bostic's going to be he's a liability in pass coverage as we found out. Then that's something that Pittsburgh can take advantage of. Here's one from Kathy Ford, a comment. My cousin who played in the NFL, who is that, Kathy, thinks laying an egg and still winning might be a great motivation. Yeah. I mean, that's, again, to repeat what I said at the beginning of the first half of the show, if you're listening on our audio platform, is it wasn't so much the laying of the egg part. It was the fact that they lost Bud Dupree. That's the only reason why I was down after that game. Here's a comment from John Knox. If I can find it, I'm always a step behind. All right. Debo may have a game or two in him, 10 snaps a game, but I seriously doubt he could hold up the next 5 games, much less the playoffs. And I agree. And I'm not even sure if he has 10 snaps in him. I mean, I'm sure, I guess anybody could come in and play for 10 snaps and maybe make a play or two. But yeah, you're right. It comes down to durability. I mean, he's, working out in a weight room all year and training all year in that regard, and playing football and being in football shape, as they say all the time, are totally two different things. So do you want to bring a guy in like that at this point? And again, what if Alex Highsmith, is playing really well? Then you have a disgruntled Debo saying, why'd you even bring me back if you're not going to play me like you did in 2017? I don't know if they want to go that route. And it might be that way with any veteran they bring in, any veteran with any kind of pedigree and a track record in the NFL, like a Harrison or a Clay Matthews. It takes most athletes have big egos, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it could be a bad thing if they're washed up, but they still think they have a chance to, or they should be playing, so. Here's one from Lucky Left. If you're left-handed, I'm a lefty too, lefty. Lucky Left. When I see Alex Highsmith, same number, same build, same effort as Lamar Woodley. Well, there you go. Well, Lamar Woodley was a lot of people don't. He left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths here, because I think a lot of folks thought he quit after he signed his big contract before the 2011 season. So a lot of people hold a grudge against him for that. But he had a heck of a run here when he was healthy, as far as getting after the quarterback, and especially in the playoffs. So he was a clutch player in the playoffs for them. So if he can have that kind of, if Alex Highsmith could be that kind of player, sign me up. I'll take it. And I don't think, back to Woodley, what I just said about Woodley, I don't think he quit after signing a contract. I just think he got hurt, and it's hard to bounce back from certain injuries, especially chronic hamstring injuries, which is what ultimately took him down. Let's see here. Here's one from Black and Gold Goggles, a funny one. I've seen this before. Debo looked like he can still hit in that commercial as long as the guy's standing still. That's pretty funny. Yeah, well, that's the thing. If it wasn't for the fact that their defense had so many great players on it, from the secondary to the linebacking core to the defensive end or defensive line, I'd say maybe, go out and sign a veteran. But they have, they have enough playmakers on this team that I think they can still make up for the loss of Dupree and Bush. Maybe not. They might not be as dominant as they were before. Maybe they don't get after the quarterback at the same rate as they did before, but I think they're still going to be a force to be reckoned with, because you just have too many special players on that defense right now for them to go in the tank, because they lost 2 admittedly important players, but still they're just 2 of many that they have on this team. They're still in much better shape than they were in 2017 when Shazier went down, as far as the amount of playmakers that they have. You're talking about Minka Fitzpatrick, Tuitt, Hayward, obviously Joe Hayden. Terrell Edmonds is coming around and starting to improve year after year. That play he made at the end of the game last week aside, that mental gaffe that he had on the touchdown to Brown. So, obviously TJ Watt, they Vince Williams. So they have it's still a really good defense, even without Dupree and Bush. And I'm confident that they can still get the job done. But I am worried. And, it's up to Alex Highsmith I don't expect him to be Bud Dupree, at least not right away. But if he can be good, if he can be productive, then he can go a long way in keeping this defense good to great down the stretch. All right. Here's one from Michael O'Malley. If I can find it. Here we go, Michael O'Malley. I'm going glass half full on Highsmith. We just have to go without Bud a year earlier than we thought. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, they just have to. This is his big chance. Here's a $2 super chat from Dave Shipley. The Saturday crew. Love the Saturday crew. Well, I love you too, Dave, and everybody else out there. Thanks for joining me as always. And here's one from Ryan O'Toole. Oh, boy, these things go so fast. All right, here we go. Getting rid of the ball in about 2 seconds certainly helps keep himself upright. Yeah, I don't think he's been – I think it's been 3 games since he's been sacked. He's not even sacked 10 times all year. So, it's just – I think he – it looks like he's gotten his timing together a little bit as far as the deep throw. I think that was part of the problem with the deep pass earlier in the year is he was – throwing it just as quickly on a deep pass as he was on a short pass. And I think that's why the timing was off. But he seems to be waiting at least a beat or 2 longer than he did earlier in the year now when he throws deep balls. And now they've been more successful with that over the last few weeks. Here's Donald Nolan. He answers my question about Ben's how clean Ben's been the last few games. 4 games without a sack, I believe. I think you're right. Here's another one from T Money. Dupree is a great loss, but just look at the defensive roster. Depth has proven to be unbelievable. Yeah, and it's gonna have to continue to be with the loss of Bud. I think and it's not just Alex Highsmith. Ola, he's been a fan favorite at times. He's been a Cam Darling at times in the recent past. So this might be his opportunity to shine. He certainly has. At least he showed in the preseason a couple. In recent years that have a bit of an aptitude for getting after the quarterback. So maybe given more of an opportunity, it's a hard glass ceiling to break, Bud Dupree and TJ Watt. So maybe now he'll get more of a chance. I'm even almost have to, because, you can't, somebody's going to have to be the primary backup between Watt and Highsmith. And who knows if Ola shines, maybe he's the starter. You just never know. So this is a great opportunity, not just for Alex Highsmith, but for Ola, for Elliott. So, we'll see what happens. And on that note, I will bid you all adieu. I hope you continue to have a great weekend. And don't forget to check out Behind the Steel Curtain, our family of podcasts, our YouTube channel, and enjoy Monday's game. If you're hearing this podcast before Monday, enjoy the game. And as always, go Steelers. Thanks a lot, everybody.